6 rounds into the new A-League season sees Perth Glory and Brisbane Roar at the foot of the table, but their respective points totals does not even come close to accurately describing the true status of both clubs. How did they get in these holes? How long will it take for them to climb out? And will it be off the back of their contradictory strikers? There's handball assists ruled out for offside in the Adelaide-Perth game. Should Bruno Fornaroli resume his place leading the line for victory on the field, whilst off at the club report nearly $10 million of losses? Auckland stay perfect, Football Australia receive some funding, and the Club World Cup draw on this episode of the Round Ball Australia podcast. My name is Lachlan Avil, and joining me today is Jacob Stevens. Jacob, we're a little low on numbers, so we've had to rope in another special guest, but it's good to get under the way and again this week.
Yeah, but as you mentioned, pre-recording, one of our best rated episodes of all time was just the two of us just going back and forth about Australian football for a while. So, you know, maybe the secret to it all is having fewer numbers on the pod every week. But we always make time for it. We always make sure we get an episode out. So, fortunately, Matt's here to help out with that today.
Absolutely, yes. Unlike, Wellington Phoenix, Sydney FC and Central Coast this week, we show up every week, no breaks, no buys off. Got to be back. But Matt Olsen, it's good to have you back, mate. We appreciate it.
Yeah, always a pleasure, guys. I don't know if you can hear that, but there is an insane siren going off outside my window, and I have no idea. I completely lost my train of thought. No idea what to say next, but it is a pleasure to be here.
Well, if some of our viewers who may not be too familiar with you, I think a great way to introduce yourself would be retell the story you told me a little bit earlier today about a badge, a football team's badge.
Oh, yeah, okay. So a team playing in the Asian Champions League tonight is Al Shorta from Iraq, one of the biggest clubs in Iraq historically. And they have an Irish, I've completely lost the word, the harp, the kind of the big string bow harp. And apparently they have it on there, not because of any claims to Irish heritage, but because a TV pundit in 1992 said that they play football like a musician plays an instrument. So that's an interesting one.
Yeah, no, that's the kind of knowledge you can expect. This kind of really deep niche core AFC football stuff. It's great. It's good to have you on. Let's get stuck in our top story today. We're going to talk a little bit about obviously the two clubs at the bottom of the table, Perth Glory and the Brisbane Roar. For me, it's a comparison that almost perfectly summates the chaos of the A-League and football in general as a whole. Perth, I'm interested, Matt, into your response to this, but probably one of the worst ever teams to start off an A-League season in terms of players on the pitch. That's just kind of where we are. And then Brisbane, who is, I think, have been competitive against top six teams at points so far, but they were the team that on the weekend, narrowly by the barest of margins, avoided this unwanted record of the most consecutive losses to start an A-League season, something that Perth dropped off a couple of weeks ago with a draw to the Mariners. It's just two teams that, we thought about at various points have been powerhouses of Australian football. We know that, Perth have this NSL link as well. Brisbane, their 3 championships, that run of rich form. It's teams that we really kind of hope don't sit towards the bottom of the table for too long. But Matt, it's they have found themselves there for one reason or another this year.
Look, I don't take conjecture because I'm Western Australian and a diehard Perth Glory fan to what just came out of your mouth. On them being I actually take conjecture with it because recency bias does a lot for that. Look at historically a lot of teams that, Newcastle and Wellington had when they never seemed they were going to change. Look at Grant Brebner's Melbourne Victory. I mean, to sit there and say...
New Zealand Knights.
I understand on talent, it's quite an insipid team, right? But just because you've never watched a game of WANPL doesn't mean you can sit there and say Kwan Go is one of the worst players to ever lace up the boots professionally. I think it's pretty disrespectful, to be honest. But granted, it's not to make concessions about the fact that they've been incredibly poor on the pitch because, they've bang on average across the 6 games conceding 3 goals a game for a total of 18 goals conceded. Like, no football team, on earth should be starting the season in that fashion, and especially in a capped, competition that's designed for equality. I mean, it's really bad. But I also think that when people who are from outside of the sphere of influence in Queensland, in Western Australia, immediately get the pitchforks out just because our local level football is not anywhere near as good. I find that it's very easy to do that from the outside looking in, and so that's where I maybe, I don't necessarily maybe hold the same opinion, but I mean, there is a very obvious trend here in that the team just want to get stability and get on this rebuilding path, and at every single level, be it administrative, be it, the actual teams and staff that have been involved on the pitch, be it repeated issues that have plagued the team over the years that haven't been addressed. Like, there's clear problems there, right? But again, I just think that there's one of several ways you approach that, and right now we don't really, ironically enough, for really hard hitting and a high regard that these gentlemen have for themselves, the people who are currently in charge, we don't know what direction they really are taking, despite the fact that they talk a lot. So there is that as well.
And the nature of where these two teams are at, Jacob, as well, is that, with the ownership situation in Perth, this feels like a much longer and larger transformation that's required. And Brisbane don't have it all right off the field either. I'm not suggesting that in the slightest, but definitely in terms of where they're playing squad at, it does look quite surprising that you'd see them below Perth on the table at this point.
Yeah, because I mean, at least in the off season, Brisbane have gone out and they've acquired players who have been good at some point, if that makes sense, right? Okay, yes, we've made fun of the fact that they had a terrible defense last season, so to improve it, they went and got a bunch of Adelaide defenders in, which is not a fantastic model to try and replicate. But Ben Warland, Harry van der Saag, at least experienced A-League players. At least what you're going to get from them. Whereas with Perth, I know they did bring back a couple of experienced players, but there was also a lot of unknowns in the squad. So I think you're right there, Lockie, in that it does seem to be on paper just sort of the complete disparity between the two teams. And it is a bit baffling why they're both at the bottom. But then we also talk about Brisbane Roar and their fixture list that they've had and the teams that they've come up against so far. They've played some really strong teams so far. So the fact that they haven't got results perhaps isn't as surprising. And if these fixtures were spread out over a season, people wouldn't be, necessarily as up in arms about it all and it being they're not a great team. It's just that they've all seemed to have happened right now at the start of the season for them. And it does give it a bit of a bad look. But I mean, Brisbane, there are signs of life there, right? I mean, Tommy Waddingham looks amazing, as there was a lot of expectation on him coming into this season. Obviously quite a few young strikers that'll be starting for their clubs this year in the A-League that are going to be looking to make a name for themselves. But Waddingham was one who, towards the back end of last season, there was a lot of talk about him. Obviously those rumours of him potentially having links to Tottenham and whatever. Obviously nothing eventuated there, and he's still at the Raw, but he's playing really fantastic football at the moment. He's already got, 3 goals this season, and that's in this Brisbane side that hasn't been able to get results. So, it's definitely a good look for him and the future there at Brisbane. I mean, you mentioned that it does seem like things at Brisbane need to be a little bit more immediate than perhaps at Perth, where it does seem to be a longer project. But with Brisbane, you can also see these talented players, like Tommy Waddingham coming through, who, have the potential to continue on into the future to really stabilise the club moving forwards. I don't really know how these two teams turn it around though, right? Because Perth's problems have been, yes, a problem with the squad and the quality of the players, but systemically things have gone wrong for them. This high press that they wanted to have this season under Zdrilic, that there was an issue with the second level of it, where the midfield weren't committing at the right time. It was I think potentially a trigger problem where they were just pressing at the wrong times, or they were holding off a little bit too long, and it just allowed that space to open up, which was exploited. Nicholas Pennington there was one example from Unite round where one of the goals they conceded there, Pennington just didn't press at all, and it just allowed all this space around him to be played through. It's those sorts of things there, which, yes, it's systemic, but it's also the caliber of players. They're not being used to the system. That's why it's not quite working. It's going to take time for Perth to get that right. Whereas with Brisbane, you can see what they want to do and they're doing it well. The issue is that defensively, they're just still not good enough. And there needs to be some major changes there if they do actually want to start getting some serious results in these games, because they are conceding a lot of goals. Yes, okay, they're scoring quite well, but when you're conceding goals like they are, and they just don't look settled defensively either, it's very difficult to build confidence from that and then go on and get results from there as well. So yeah, I mean, both teams obviously at the bottom of the ladder at the moment. I don't think any of us had, especially Brisbane, this low. Perth, I can't remember our preseason predictions. I had them quite high. I think I had them making the 6. So it is perhaps for me a little bit of a surprise to see these two so low.
Matt, we talked to you before the season started. You're obviously pretty well embedded in the football club over there in Perth, and you were talking about lots of positive noise coming out of pretty much every department of the football club. Has the early results changed that tune in any way, do you think?
I mean, in the sense that there's a lot of reclusiveness and a lot of, the ability to kind of not really want to comment on things right now. I think that's a very natural emotional reaction. But I think in terms of at least being positive about change and how the change happens, I think that most of the staff at the club are much the same towards it. Mostly because I think when they look at someone like Stan Lazaridis, I mean, guy, can really carry on sometimes, right? But he's someone that I think people see his intent, people see his love for the football club. And so just because he's acting like, a bit of an a-hole on, national radio sometimes doesn't necessarily mean that you have to think negatively towards him. I mean, he is someone who has been through the system in WA, taken his exploits to the Premier League in England, and wanted to be here to give back to football in Western Australia. Like, that's someone who cares. And again, compared to the different figures that would come and go when Tony Sage was just doing what he does and being quite negligent of a lot of the operations, that's a big change that you have to put up with. And when you've got people who are so passionate about it at the face of it all, that is something that, again, is going to spur you a certain way. And that's probably why the pretense of a lot of positivity came in. I think, not to sort of segue too far away from the question, but I just think that also on the topic of David Zrilic and, his tactical style, everyone's saying that, they need to give him time and that the ability is there. It just needs to be molded into something that he can create in his own image. And I think that is very true. I don't think anyone's sitting here, saying that, the club are a lost cause, because in don't get me wrong, there are ways where it probably feels like that, and to the extent where it probably is true. But I think that so as long as the system is quite protective in Australian football, which naturally it is, there is going to be the ability for the team to finally get better. And I mean, look, it sounds ridiculous, but, I've had people say to me after, the Mariners draw, the result in Adelaide over the last weekend on Friday night, there was actually signs there that something was happening. And when you're a team at the bottom with that kind of record, you need that. And so I think, I wouldn't say that it's a doomsday scenario for a lot of people who are, actually there representing the club on a day-to-day basis.
Jacob, you were there at the game on Friday night, Adelaide 2, Perth Glory 2. Did you see signs of that progress out on the field?
Yeah, and I think everybody there did. It definitely felt like after about the 65th minute that a Perth win was a distinct possibility with the way that they were playing at that point in time in the game. They'd sort of weathered that early 30 minutes from Adelaide, which is sort of almost the identity that Adelaide have crafted for themselves this year of being really fast starters and being aggressive early. Perth did a really good job of weathering that. They didn't allow a shot on target in the first half. Obviously get on the score sheet with Taggart towards the end of the first half, riding high into the second. It's a bit more transitional. The game opens up, but they still look to be creating the better of the chances of the two teams. And it did feel like at one point, hang on, Perth could go on and win this. And Taggart uncharacteristically blazed one over the bar inside the penalty area. I think about the 65th, 66th minute of the game, one that, probably about 7 or 8 times out of 10 he probably buries or at least gets on target. That could have been the one to give Perth all the points. And it's something that Zrilic actually talked about in the post-match press conference. He was asked, obviously a point away to Adelaide is a good result for most teams in the league, but it must feel like those 3 points were within your grasp. And he was like, yeah, like it did feel that way, but we also had to make sure that we did secure the point as well, because we're in this situation where we can't, we can't be too aggressive and throw away the points completely. completely, because every little helps with the confidence and trying to build what we're doing here at the club. So yeah, I think that I definitely saw things that I liked from Perth. I think that in transition, they looked at a very, very good team. Obviously, Adam Taggart is starting to find his scoring boots this season. It's taken him a couple of games. He's getting into it now. And that's a dangerous prospect for everybody else in the league, because he's very, very good at finding space in and around the box. And then when he does, he puts the ball in the back of the net. I think defensively, yes, still a few issues, but they're also coming up against, Adelaide, who have been a very strong attacking side over the last few years as well. So, to only concede 2 to a high-flying Adelaide side, especially given, the quality of chances that Adelaide created, they didn't allow Adelaide to create a huge number of really good chances. So, there was definitely some good things. And one thing to tidy up for Perth is set pieces, defending them and giving them away in dangerous areas. And that's another thing that Zrilic talked about. I asked him about, you gave up a lot of really dangerous set pieces here. And he said, yeah, it's something that we need to work on and need to stop conceding from, because they've conceded a bunch of goals this season from set pieces. You take those away, a lot of these results are a lot tighter, and it perhaps doesn't look as bad for the Glory as things are at the moment. So, there's definitely really good signs of life in that squad. And I think everything that Matt just said as well about, sort of hopefully this protectionism in Australian football comes through to help the Glory out here, because, yeah, you can definitely feel like there's something brewing there, especially after this last result against Adelaide.
You mentioned both the strikers now, Adam Taggart and Thomas Waddingham. I want to jump into the comparison between those two now, because, Matt, it feels like for different reasons there's a lot of burden on those two players. Like Tommy Waddingham is probably the young talent coming out of Brisbane that is the guy that everyone's looking to for the potential, for the excitement, kind of in the same way that Nesta was pegged in that role for Adelaide. He's really stepped up, at very least his output this year. He had 7 goals, 1 assist last season, already 3 goals, 1 assist this season. He said he models his game off Haaland. He very much plays within the width of the box. It doesn't have too many touches, but the shots that he does get are very high XG whenever he gets them. He's now just, I believe it's the second player to score 10 goals before turning the age of 20, which is also another comparison to Nesta, who I think was on 16. His birthday is in April, by the way, for those wondering, for Tommy Waddingham. He has that kind of youth angle on things, but for Perth Glory, and you look at Adam Taggart, he's very much the leader that a lot of people are looking to be the one to sometimes grab the team by the scruff of the neck and obviously be the one that scores goals, but also be the captain and the leadership element of the team that drives them forward. He got back on the score sheet, as Jacob said, with the double today. How do you compare those two players, and what has it been like for Adam to be part of a team that is so youthful and is probably really looking to him more than most teams do?
I think firstly on Waddingham, I think that there is still a lot of exceptional young talent within Raw's system, namely Quinn McNichol, who's someone that I think deserves a bit more of a shot. I mean, he was one of the main catalysts that led the Joeys to become the champions of Southeast Asia, which was an achievement that I don't think people really understand or appreciate in this country, to be brutally honest with you. But for just wanted to get my 2 cents in on that one. Thomas Waddingham is probably someone that I would say, so as long as he's in a system like that, he is probably going to be a little bit dragged in terms of his potential and where he can go and how he can get that move. And that's something that, if you're on the outside looking in, you'd probably feel a little bit miffed on, I feel like Waddingham's not even had that much international play. There's not really been talks of him getting a move. And when he's got that kind of potential in him and he's got the kind of ceiling, it is a little bit frustrating to see that. But I think it's mostly due in part to the team that's behind him, honestly. And I think looking at that angle with Adam Taggart, right? Adam Taggart came directly from Cesaro Ahsoka to a Ruben Zankovic coached Perth Glory team with the eye of, I just straight up want to go back to Western Australia. I want to be, signing my front door for random strangers who see it on Facebook. I want to be, I want to be, really part of the club that I've just grown up supporting and I'm a big part of. And I think, honestly, there's something really endearing about the fact that this club is at its lowest of lows. And he's just there doing what he does and being a leader for the team. I think it speaks to his character, but also especially the part where he scored 30 goals in the K-League for Suwon, got back into the Socceroos, and that was only 4 or 5 years ago. He is still playing at a really, really high caliber level where he probably could still be happily making it in the J League, J League 2 comfortably at a K-League club. And he's here instead. He's here captaining his boyhood club, giving everything to help the players around him become better people. And that's such an exciting thing, no matter which way you put it, right? So I think that there's just this ongoing narrative with both of them that's really gripping and really exciting. But ultimately, in terms of the statistical output, you're probably almost putting more expectation on Waddingham of the two, which is ridiculous, right? Because when that ceiling is so high, when there's more to give, when there's more of a narrative when a player's younger, you want that input. And I think people naturally see Brisbane's potential a bit higher than they do Perth's as well. So, I mean, you talk about stuff like, his ability to produce a high XG, where he suits on the pitch. I mean, there's more versatility as well, you would argue. Whereas someone like Taggart can just, he can drift back and basically carry the whole team on his back. You're not necessarily going to get that from Waddingham. Yeah. You're going to want the versatility. And so I think it is naturally a more exciting thing. But they're both really exciting players. And honestly, it's good that we're talking about attacking players being at the heart of both of these teams, because it shows that there is probably a way to reinvigorate the rest of the players in that squad, knowing what they've got ahead of them. So I think it's a very, very apt compliment to both of them that we're able to talk about them at length in teams that are doing so poorly.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's tackle the games individually a little bit more. Bulls versus the Raw, 4-4, just straight up the scoreline is exceptional, right? It's only the third time that's happened in A-League men's history. So much fun. I mean, whenever there are goals, it's fun, right? Let's be honest. I really thought Brisbane were going to win this. And then for me, the change of the game came with Jake Coleman and Jed Drew, just two massively influential players in this MacArthur lineup. I said it online on the other night. I think Jed Drew, at least in his output so far in the first 6 rounds, you could easily say he's the best crosser in the league. The balls that he's played in for Jakalic early on, and he played one in. I can't remember which goal it was. There was that many, but there was one in there somewhere. Yeah, there was one in there somewhere. And those two young Australians were exceptional to watch, which was great fun. And then, Jacob just... MacArthur coming back. I think the second 2 Brisbane Raw goals were like both own goals as well.
Both own goals, yeah.
Absolute chaos. But I mean, the good thing for the Raw is that they don't get that record of being the first side to get 5 losses to start a season in a row. No matter how much, we said this last week, no matter how much positivity you can build up in preseason, if you start with that many losses and you get this record, like that just drops so much.
Yeah. But it's also like one of those ones where I don't think it matters to either team here because it was so chaotic, if that makes sense, right? Like they can't be like, oh, we should have done this. We should you can't plan for a game like this. And I mentioned it in the predictions video. Go watch that on YouTube, by the way. Well, actually, that will be out later in the week, so you can't watch it straight away. Nice try. I tried to plug it. But I said basically that teams are going to have these games where it just all goes crazy for whatever reason, and it will happen once in a season. It's just so happened that the two teams were playing against each other in this one game, and we got this scoreline. Only the third time to ever happen. Crazier thing is that only the first time that it ever happened was in the 22-23 season. So very recent. And you think back over all the years of A-League football, there's never been another 4-4 or a fourth 4-4 result in that. It is insane. But yeah, the 2 own goals as 2 Brisbane ones, perhaps a stroke of luck, but also, again, just getting the ball into the right place in the box and just letting chaos ensue. And, Philip Curto is one of the best goalkeepers in the league, and we're always saying that. It does require perhaps a little bit of luck to get the ball past him at times, and I think that Brisbane found that in this game. And yeah, you're right, it'll be a huge confidence boost for them to not start the season off with that really unwanted record. And to sort of go from this, but it's a difficult one to build from, right? Because it was so chaotic that really you're going to have to just pick out individual moments and small passages of play and work from that. You can't look at the result as a whole and go, right, here's something to build on, because you don't want to be conceding 4 a game, and you don't want to have to rely on 2 own goals a game either. So it's a crazy result. I don't think any of us were. I think we were predicting perhaps a close game, but definitely not a 4-4. And for Brisbane, huge. It'll be a big boost to their confidence to finally get that monkey off their back, get that first point of the season. They're now breathing down the neck of Perth who have only the 2 points, so a potential chance to leapfrog them and rid themselves of the wooden spoon spot. And for Macarthur, it's another one where they just don't get the result that they'd have wanted. Right, they're coming up against a Brisbane side that's out of form. They're perhaps suffering for form a little bit themselves, but maybe would have fancied themselves. And you did mention Jedru. What a fantastic player he is, and they really felt his impact when he was on the pitch, because he's just been such a focal point of their attacking phases of play this season. You mentioned his crossing ability is insane, but it's the way that he finds space on the wing that's so appealing to me, because even when there is good link-up play on that right-hand side, or if he is double-teamed or whatever, he's still managing to find the space to present as a passing option, and then to be able to obviously beat his man and get the ball in the box, whether that's from a slightly deeper area on the pitch and have it angled towards the back post, or whether it's as he's pushing up towards the goal line and he's just putting the ball back across and hoping for a touch on it. Either way, he's just got pinpoint accuracy on it, and it's a really good skill to have, because especially in the A-League, where you're going to see a lot of this wing play, having somebody like that who can consistently put the ball in the right areas is a huge plus. And so having him back is going to be huge for Macarthur. Like I said, we saw his impact in this game, and I think Macarthur will be happy that he did have that impact. Brisbane will be happy to finally get a point. So both teams perhaps just going to go, right, let's pretend to forget this one and move on to next week, because it was just a whole lot of craziness.
For Friday night, Matt, I wanted to ask you about the substitution of Caicedo as well. Comes on, I think, on or around the 60th minute, and then back off again around the 90th. And Driller's explanation after the game makes total sense to me. Caicedo wasn't doing the defensive work that he should have been, and they want to, again, wrap up a point. And, that in isolation makes sense. But I just wonder, I'm just putting this question out there, is that worth the potential shake-up in the locker room? Because obviously Caicedo was not happy about it, right? As much as you can, put a few extra minutes on the field with a more defensive-minded player to shore up a point, you are going to cause yourself some issues, because football players have egos, and Caicedo's was definitely bruised after that incident.
Christian Caicedo and Luis Kanga don't speak English. So as far as, they're going to kick up a fuss in the change room, and, the relationships that exist are going to get ruined, with all due respect, they barely exist. Right. They barely exist. I'm just being honest. They are in quite an isolated, insular environment, those boys, and there's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah.
It's just that the idea it can kick up a big fuss. The only tension that's going to come is, between essentially Caicedo and his direct leadership figures. I don't think there's anyone in the team that, they're not really the type either. They are extremely laid back guys. The typical kind of Spanish influenced players, who I think really value obviously the lifestyle here, and, they value the role that they contribute within the team. Some obviously more than others. But I, to be honest, no, I don't really read into it. I think it's just the fact that it's the metrics within the fact that there's a team that's performing really poorly, and, within a coach where there has been a lot of questions on how he's trying to work his methodology, the players that he has in his team. Naturally, this is something that's going to add fuel to the fire, right? Which is where the problem lies. But the idea that it's just going to completely tear apart the team from within, and that there's going to be any kind of upheaval, I kind of hate to say it, but that sort of thing requires a certain level of parity to begin with, and I just don't honestly know that we're looking at it, especially when it comes to those guys, because basically the assistant manager, one of the assistant managers was brought in from the Mariners, Andreas Savallo, I believe his name is, and he is the Spanish speaker in the team that's relaying a lot of Zrilich's ideas to Caicedo and Kanga in Spanish, right? So it's almost like Andreas, who is probably going to bear the brunt of a lot of that from Caicedo. Andreas, Caicedo, and Kanga, they have their own kind of group. And then, of course, it's not to say that Kanga won't sit there and, be friendly with Lockie Barr, and the two of them won't have their limited kind of relationship. Ultimately, as the two centre-backs, they need to have a very solid relationship. And it was said long before we even knew who Lewis Kanga was that the South American player that was coming in is going to be dependent on building a solid relationship with the defensive pairing, which we're talking about it in a footballing sense, right? We're not talking about like actually being friends off the pitch.
Yeah.
So basically, I just think that the more people read into it, the more they really have no idea what goes on behind closed doors. A lot of football teams, and that's just my honest reality of the situation. And to be honest, the only reason I'm so well versed on this is because I was down in Bunbury to do the one-on-one interview with Josh Riston for another outlet, but. When I was down there, I noticed immediately Andre's constantly walking back and forward and having all these conversations. And Jared Carluccio tells me they don't speak English. So, it's just one of those things where I think people are going to look at it looking far worse than it is and make a big deal of it.
Fair enough. No, it reminds me of that clip when Ange was in Japan.
The translator.
He's trying to demonstrate to the referee,
Yes.
and the translator's the one that gets booked by the referee.
That's great.
Lines of communication everywhere. No, fair enough. I mean, look, I agree with you. Like, it's something that I was more referring to, like the relationship with a specific player, right? I don't think there was ever going to be a big team blowout about it. But no, it's good to have your insight on it. Look, we could talk about the disallowed goal to Bart Vriens. I don't think we should, to be honest. It took too long. They probably got to the right decision. I think that's all we really need to say on it. Let's move on to another interesting question, Jacob, which is the choice between Nikos Vergos and Bruno Fornaroli for the Melbourne Victory Football Club. Featured goals on Sunday in their 3-1 win for both players, and it's given rise again to the question of who should lead the line. The North Terrace made their feelings quite clear after the game, chanting Bruno, Bruno at PK when he came over to clap them after the game. I thought he took his goal very well. I think it was like 2 minutes or something after coming on. Yes, Vergos scored, but it was just not the same quality of goal. Sutton really should be doing better in keeping that out. And for me, I feel like, Patrick has shown that if you're not performing, really well, exceptional, like if you perform well, you're going to keep your place no matter what your name is. I think Reno Piscopo has proved that. But as soon as an opportunity is provided and an opportunity is taken, Bruno's, for me, taken that, and I wouldn't be surprised if he does earn the start against Perth next week. I think that tipping point has probably been reached.
I mean, he deserves it, right, with the way that he's been performing off the bench. Free kick against Wellington, which forces a good save out of Oluwayemi. Obviously, the goal here, you mentioned, really well taken. I don't think it's been talked about enough how good of a strike that is from him. I mean, obviously it's a great ball in behind, but he makes a fantastic run to get into the space. A good first touch to make sure that, he doesn't overhit it. It doesn't end up behind him. He keeps it under control. And then a really nice, well taken finish as well to top it all off. A pretty quintessential Bruno goal. I think that I don't want to say just off the back of that one goal alone he deserves a starting spot, but off of the performances that he has had so far, it definitely begs the question, right? And, we've seen throughout the season from PK when he's been asked about, so who's going to be the starting striker heading forwards? He's always been talking about the other one in the conversation, which is Jing Reese, and he's always brought Jing Reese up. Oh, don't forget about Jing Reese. We've got Jing Reese as well, who I think is quite firmly now at this point at the bottom of the pile of the three of them, because in the minutes that he has had this season, he's been almost completely ineffective for the Victory, which is a bit of a shame because, he's a talented young player and there's a lot of people who think that he could go on to do some great things, but he's just not quite showing it at the moment for this Victory side, whereas Vergos and Bruno are both scoring goals. And we mentioned sort of disparity between the two, the quality of the two finishes. I don't think it really matters too much in PK's mind because it's your strikers are both scoring goals. And I think it actually makes things a little bit difficult because of that fact. Do you just stick with Vergos because, he started last week and he scored? Perhaps if you start Bruno, maybe it's foreign ground to him now, right? He's had so many games off the bench that's what he's used to now. So this might be a point where, Bruno's career does transition into him being perhaps more of that late game specialist, Jayden Kucharski, but on the other end of the age, on the other end of the age chart. Maybe that's the case. Who knows? But you don't know these things unless you give it a chance to happen, right? And you're only going to know it if you give Bruno the chance to start coming up here against Perth. I mean, it's the perfect opportunity for him to start, right? Against Perth Glory, They're down and out. We've just spoken about them. They're struggling to stop conceding
I don't know
goals.
if we said they were down and out.
Well, no. That's what others are saying, as Matt has corrected course to suggest it's not all doom and gloom with the Glory. But yeah, I mean, on the field, they're conceding a lot of goals. Bruno is somebody who likes to score goals, and he's made a career out of it. I say give him the start. What's the worst that can happen? You watch him go concede 2 own goals now off of Bruno.
Well, I mean, like it's almost higher stakes. Like if you're expected to score goals, and all of a sudden a 0 looks a lot worse than it would against like a Sydney or something like that. I wonder, Matt, a lot of Victory's goals this season has come in transition moments. They've really, really struggled to break teams down. That's been a very consistent issue for Melbourne Victory over the years. And a lot of people are saying that Bruno Fornaroli, you look at his profile in terms of Virgos, is maybe the player that is more likely to unlock that kind of goal.
Yeah, look, I think the issue really comes from the fact that Kisnorbo is very, I guess, dependent on a certain type of player that I don't know Victory have. When you look at his successes with City, there was just a bit of an edge that you had, with someone like a Stefan Kolakowski at the time, who was adding a lot of dynamism out wide. Atkinson, I feel like there's a lot of talent, particularly in wider areas, that they don't have, in support of, someone who's a natural poacher like a Bruno. And so in finding the kind of balance for that, I think that you really ought to look at, the plan B and C, how that ultimately works, and the extra work that the players are putting in to kind of, reel in that deficit. And ultimately, that's where someone like Bruno naturally is a liability in Kisnorbo trying to make the system work. So, there's that angle to it. But I also just think that if you provide an opportunity where you are going to be good enough on the front foot, like against, a team like Perth towards the bottom of the table, it probably also makes pretty fertile ground for Bruno to come out and have a good performance as well. So I think that that's a different angle to take, entirely on the situation. And I also think that it kind of maybe does contradict a lot of PK's decisions and a lot of sort of what he is trying to work out. And ultimately, it'll be a total false dawn. If Bruno bags a hat-trick, that is going to be a false dawn, absolutely. I go so far as to say that pretty comfortably he's going to have a bit of a crash if he performs too well in the immediate future. So, my take on the situation would really just be that PK's going to have a lot of hard work to do to bring Victory to the very, very top level, seemingly with what he's got in front of him. So,
the other side of this result was Western United, and John Aloisi was not happy at all post-game, talking about his team. Seriously unhappy with their performance. He was saying very happy with the first 5 games, despite the results that are coming out. It was just this game they didn't really give it to the opposition in the same way. For those unaware as well, the reason why this game was held at Amy Park has got nothing to do with trying to get more people in the stands or anything like that, which is a couple of things that I heard on the weekend. Police and security had an issue with hosting local derbies, so games against Melbourne City and Melbourne Victory at Ironbark Fields. So that was a mandatory requirement for them to play those fixtures somewhere else. It's the same reason why the Melbourne City Western game was at Amy Park as well. That was technically a home game for Western United. But my favourite moment from this game was honestly Patrick Kisnorbo almost getting his head taken off by the football that was hooked by John Aloisi very close. And the reaction from the 4th official is classic as well. If you haven't seen it, go look it up. But before we move on from Victory, we've got some off-field stuff to talk about. They are a little bit different in the A-League in terms of how they are structured as a football club. They are a public limited company, which means that they have to publicly disclose their financial reports through ASIC, which is the Australian Securities and Investments Commission. When Melbourne Victory did this last week for the 23-24 financial year, those reports revealed an annual loss of nearly 10 million Australian dollars. This is all per Jack Snape, who is a sport reporter at The Guardian. That loss is up 33% from the previous year. Some key highlights: their liabilities exceeded assets by over 12 million, which essentially means they owe a lot more money than what they have. In order to combat this, Jacob, their deferred payment terms with a number of people they owe money to. They have agreements with shareholders to contribute more capital, so 3.4 million of which they have already received since the close of the financial year, which is obviously the end of July, so about 5 months from now. They have forecasted growth in partnerships, which hilariously they announced plenty of in the days following the release of this document, which I thought was
Try and bury it, yeah.
And they've apparently had some internal guarantees that cash obligations, at least within 12 months, will definitely be met. Now, there's a lot of stuff that doesn't sound good in there, but we do have to keep a couple of things in mind. As I said, we are talking about this because Victory are the club that we actually do get access to these numbers. Who knows what is going on at other football clubs around the league. Clubs are allowed to lose money. I guess it all comes down to a question of how much capital the owners and the shareholders in this case are willing to put in. So there's a scale in there as well, especially in hard times, right? So they have a post-COVID, return, re-jump, whatever you want, plan that they're in through, and losses during this time of that recovery are expected. And there's also the interesting absence of a particular business in there that was quoted as a strategic capital partner that didn't quite plan out the way they wanted to. And if you're reading between the lines, I don't think 777 appeared on the slot machines, if you know what I mean. So there's a lot of dire numbers in there, but I don't know. How do you interpret it?
A football club in Australia is losing money. Big deal. I mean, like you said, we're only talking about Victory because they have to publicly disclose it. And, what are the other clubs like? Probably pretty similar, to be honest. I mean, yeah, okay, Victory haven't been helped out by this massive partnership falling through with 777. That was the expectation of a lot of money to come through there, and that's obviously not coming through, which is going to hurt things. So in some ways, to only be down 10 million is kind of perhaps a little bit of a miracle, all things considered there. But yeah, the fact that it is a growth on the previous season is the bit that sticks out to me as perhaps a bit worrying, because everywhere else around the league, it does seem like things are starting to stabilize now after COVID, right? Crowds are coming back. The football is coming back. It does seem like things are starting to get on the right track. And so to see an increase in loss is not a fantastic sign. But look, I don't know the inner workings of Melbourne Victory. I don't know the inner workings of the financial departments of any of the football clubs in the league. So it's difficult to make an informed opinion on this when $10 million, they could have accounted for that. They could have known that they were going to be suffering a loss. And so, well, like you said, they've deferred payment terms with some people where they can, probably knowing in advance that, hey, we're going to be suffering a decent loss here. We need to be able to restructure our financial plans so that we can pay off the debts that we can, in the immediate future, and set ourselves up for stability. That's something that I don't want to talk about Adelaide all the time, but it's a perfect time to, because when the consortium of owners came in and bought Adelaide back in, I think it was 2018, 2019, something like that, they did spend a long time of just reworking debts and paying people off and stuff, not paying people off in the bad way, paying people off as in the people they owe money to then set themselves up to be financially stable, which I think they announced was at last season, that they finally hit a point now where they're not losing money every season and that they are financially stable. So look, the fact that, yeah, again, as I said at the start of this, an Australian football club is losing money isn't a massive deal to me. And yeah, the fact that we don't quite know absolutely everything about how football clubs in this country work in terms of their financials, it's really difficult to say if this is a good or a bad thing. It's obviously not a good thing, right? We want the clubs to be making money, but it's something that they could have accounted for already, and have been prepared for. And like you said, they did announce sort of a slew of sponsorships and partnerships in the days after this report, perhaps just holding off on that news to try and make it sound like good things are on the way. Again, knowing that they're going to be reporting a loss, so they have to put things in place. So yeah, I don't want to make an opinion on it saying, oh, this is definitely terrible for the club, because we just don't know. Obviously, it's not ideal to be losing money, but we've mentioned, the fact that things haven't quite gone their way recently with partnerships, the fact that the league and football as a whole in this country is struggling a bit for cash. It's not massively surprising that they've lost a bit of money here.
Yeah, the Derby invasion incident was also cited as a reason. Obviously, you can't attribute one thing to all of these losses or anything, but definitely played a part. Matt, I think I read it similar. I think like the 10 million number sounds alarming, but it's probably significantly more alarming because it's the one peak through the door that's cracked open that we get a look into these A-League clubs. And, considering where the league has been over the last few years, maybe it's not quite as bad as maybe it looks.
So I'm actually, in response to this, I want to take a leaf from another code. And it's very rare that we actually are on level terms with another code, or at least we don't talk about this enough. I don't think in Australian football discourse. But when you look at the folding of the Melbourne Rebels that happened in rugby union recently, the thing that really bothered me about that was how, like, the media at the time basically fixated on look at these really bad figures. Like look at how poorly the Melbourne Rebels are done, and because there was taxpayer money that was involved in certain areas and certain grants and things that they'd taken over time, your money is being used for a useless rugby franchise, and they just shoved it straight down your throat. And then people started talking about Rugby Australia's finances, and they went to the Brumbies and they started attacking the code, just for the sake that it wasn't garnering that much money and income. And it's like, this is all this reeks of to me, is just let's get the pitchforks out at Melbourne Victory and talk about how Australian soccer has no money. Like, yeah, of course, a product that's not very popular is not going to have a lot of income sitting around. That's how these things work, And Australian football, it's in a better position than rugby union is in Australia in this day and age. And I don't think we should cop a lot of that stuff coming through, because ultimately the Melbourne Victory are a huge franchise, and yeah, they've had a lot of problems historically. You remember when they played in the Asian Champions League and they had the sketchy Hong Kong-based betting sponsor and things like that. And it's only that sort of thing happens as a byproduct of the fact that the game naturally needs income. This is how, again, not to kind of bring it up, but it's kind of why the whole Destination New South Wales thing happened, right? If we get a chance to be able to, make the game more lucrative, we won't say no to it necessarily. And, by equal token, when reporters see something like this that is laid out to the public, they just want to call it out, and they just want to emphasize, look how unpopular soccer is. Look at all this wasted money that's in the game. And it's just nonsense. It's just there to rile up an emotion in people.
Interesting. Because I don't think there's been a particular big deal made about it in wider circles. I think it's a tough topic, and Melbourne Victory, like the inner members of that team and the board, they're going to be the only ones that truly know, exactly where they're at in terms of their plans moving forward and what they think they're going to look like in 3 to 5 years. And we're not trying to suggest by any means that this is a disaster for Melbourne Victory, because, as I say, I think the fact that these are the numbers that we see kind of masks what the situation is all over the league. But yeah, interesting to talk about nonetheless. Jacob, in terms of the other results that we saw this week, Melbourne City 0, Western Sydney 2, and Auckland 2, Newcastle 0. The big story there, probably Auckland still perfect. Took them a little bit longer than what most people would have expected in this game, but sets up a cracking one next week.
Yeah, how have they've still not conceded a goal? That's the most incredible thing. Like, I can get winning all of your first, 5-6 games, but not conceding in that time frame is pretty incredible, to be honest. And they just keep managing to do it. They keep getting these results. And it was obviously later in the game this time to get that breakthrough goal, and a very well taken finish on the volley as well, might I add, to score that one. But yeah, it's a great story, right? Because it's this new club coming into the league. They've got a point to prove, and they're proving that point. But part of me does hope that they slow down to try and, bring a bit of competition to the rest of the league, so they don't just run away with the title, because while it would be nice for the new kids on the block to go and win it in their first season, let's also temper expectations. Let's have a more competitive season now. That would be fun as well, I think, especially with the talent that's in a few of the sides this season that we've seen. Obviously Wellington are starting to get things going, Victory looking good, Sydney looking good. It could be a really fun battle for those top spots, but it won't be much of a battle if Auckland keep going the way that they are. And it's, again, I'm going to bring up the fact that they have such a well-balanced squad. They're just across the park a very, very good football team. They've invested well, and they've recruited well in the right areas. The likes of Hiroki Saka coming in and being captain is a huge a huge signing for any club, let alone one that's brand new to the league. The rest of their defensive investments have been brilliant. Dan Hall, Francis de Vries has been an incredible signing as well. You've got the likes of Galagos as well, who's a quality player as you progress the ball forwards. So they've just done a fantastic job of recruitment and building a squad that is here to play football, but also here to win now. It's not a case of, right, we're a new team, let's find our footing and let's go and, build a squad that we can hopefully take to some silverware in a couple of years. We're only going to get this one chance to win it in our first season. So let's go out there and do that, right? And it's sort of similar vibes to the Wanderers when they came into the competition and they had a really hot start, and for those first few seasons were one of the best sides in the league. I could see a similar thing here happening with Auckland, and I think that could be huge because we've seen what their crowd numbers are like and the support that they do get. The Port active supporters, fantastic atmosphere that they bring to the game. Even when it's pouring down with rain as it was on the weekend, they still turn up in massive numbers making a bunch of noise. Again, echoes of the Wanderers there, right? In that the Wanderers, one of their big things was the active support and the RBB when they came in. Auckland are kind of doing the same, but in their Kiwi fashion. And I think it's fantastic. Obviously, yeah, like I said, I do hope they slow down to try and bring some competition to those top spots in the league. But you can't deny that they've done an absolutely cracking job in getting started in this competition. They've recruited well, they've invested well, they've got the crowd behind them, and they're playing some good football. So yeah, you can't begrudge them for the results that they're getting.
A couple of new records for them this week. Best start by a new team in A-League's history. Longest time before conceding a first goal in Australian National League history. I do like how a lot of these are kind of like Australian National League history, because you can't just leave it as Australian history. It's quite funny to me. Second highest debut home crowd for a new A-League's club. And the second team in Australian, again, National League history to win their first 5 games. Matt, it kind of seems like the more games you play, you should be less confident the record continues, but you also kind of feel that they just keep getting clean sheets. Like you feel even more convinced about how good they are as a football club.
Oh, look, I just think on Auckland, all you can say is that, they were very intelligent with how they wanted to go about creating the football operations. Do you remember kind of in 2017-18 when we used to have, conversations about promotion, relegation, and expansion until we were black and blue in the face every 2 days? And that would literally be like every football show. It'd be like, okay, it's Wednesday, we're talking about this. They wouldn't believe. And in that time, the one thing that people used to always say is in the MLS, the one thing they do well is they blood these franchises in 2-3 years before they're playing a game, and they just build culture, and they exist to the point where you'd think they'd been an entity that's been around for a long time. Now, Auckland didn't maybe necessarily have like a lot of time, but they had enough time to build that culture, build the football club, have the smart recruitment, and have an incredible backing by someone like Bill Foley, who I don't know if you guys have really looked into it much. The guy bought Auckland FC because he owns some wineries and restaurants here and he was bored. You know what I mean? Like, dude's won Stanley Cups in the US and he's just like, okay, I'll play a professional soccer team. You kidding? I'll send New Zealand to the World Cup. Are you kidding? It's crazy. It's crazy. And, some vanity project, eh? They're absolutely killing it. And they are probably on par, if not better, than the Wanderers in how they've been set up in that regard. It just really talks to how starved the area was for professional football for the longest time. Consider that most Wellington fans are realistically in the northern part of the South Island as well. I mean, that area had been so untapped for professional football for the longest time. Of course, we're going to get, guys like Liam Gillian come in and have the impact that he's had because Auckland's just had the football talent sitting there for the longest time. And I look at this and I'm really not shocked at all. And I'm also glad that it's done a lot for the careers of someone like a Jake Brimmer, who had one good season where he won the Johnny Warren medal, hasn't really done a lot in or around it. He's able to kind of stake his claim, and give some respect to his name in his career. Stephen Corica, redemption arc. I mean, how many times, with Sydney FC did he promise, I'm finally going to be able to get to that level. I'm finally going to be able to, take the club, to even bigger heights. And he never really was able to kind of stake his claim, apart from being, the follow-on from Graham Arnold. And the championships that he did win were a byproduct of the incredible squad that was around him, that arguably, did he build it, did he not? There was some conjecture there. And he's totally proved people wrong by being in this project, being alongside someone that he knows really well in Terry McFlynn. Like, the team is just built to a plumb. I mean, I love it. So really excited with the team, but also really excited with, like you say, I mean, the stats just don't lie. This team is going to continue to be consistent. And even when they do start conceding and things start going wrong, it's the consistency that's going to make them such a lethal product and a lethal team to play against.
Hell of an away day for the Jets just to get out and back from New Zealand. So here's the story per James Gardner at the Newcastle Herald. They began their travel on Thursday. The flight gets delayed and then cancelled. 2/3 of my Unite round trip, which thankfully I did make it home on the Sunday night. But they get to the Sydney hotel, have to train instead of at the stadium in just a suburban park. The quote is, dodging dog poo, which sounds fun. The one flight out is then at 7 p.m. on the Friday night. They get to their hotel in Auckland at 2 a.m. on the day of kickoff, which is very rough. Then the flight back, there's some storms in Sydney as they're coming in. They circle around for an hour, end up getting diverted to Canberra, refuel, get to Sydney after the storms. All in all, about a 7-hour delay on the return trip as well. And then not so much for the players, but for some of the support staff, Jacob, a bunch of training equipment had been unloaded in Canberra and left behind. So not quite the travel plans you want.
Disastrous. And then to top it all off with a loss as well, when it looked like you were maybe headed for the point late in the game. Yeah, that's a tough one. And yet, did you see the travelling support that they managed to get, which was I thought a pretty incredible turnout, all things considered. I wonder if any of their away fans got caught up in all these delays and cancellations as well, because that would have been a nightmare trip for them too. But yeah, look, this is one of the little vagaries of this crazy league that we've got, in that you do have to travel overseas for the domestic competition, and it's not a short trip, and things like this are going to happen. And this might happen for a club potentially in Europe on a Champions League away day. Very unlikely, mind you, but it could happen. Whereas here, it can happen during just your regular season league fixture. So, it's just part of what makes the A-League so fantastic, is that, you can never quite account for these things happening. And, it's good that they were able to get in. They were able to play the game. There weren't any delays to the actual, game itself. They didn't have to cancel the game. They didn't have to do anything like that. But yeah, not exactly going to plan there for the Jets, either on or off the pitch. I think sort of in some ways a small little glimpse into their season as a whole so far, and it has been a little bit not quite to plan for what they've been looking for this season, but it makes for a fun story. You add it to the folder of those PK League moments. Just this whole trip for the Jets is one of them.
It's not quite climbing up a mountain in Kyrgyzstan like the Mariners got to do last year, but it's definitely one for the storybook as well. Final game, City Wanderers. I was there, to be honest, not terribly entertaining. For me, the Wanderers scored as they always do. And, City, Aurelio Vidmar warned us about it pre-match. He said that they probably didn't quite have the momentum. They weren't quite as sharp after 20 days since their last competitive fixture. And that's how it played out. They lacked, their quality forward line that are obviously out injured. They struggled to replace. Nathaniel Atkinson was essentially playing as a winger at times, which is as good and a versatile player as he is, you're always going to struggle with. But the most interesting thing I can talk about on Melbourne City, Matt, is the fact that Terry Antonis' goal has been nominated for the Puskas Award, for the FIFA Award. It's just the whole... I just love the idea of the whole world watching this goal. The flick over and the long range, the volley from halfway, it's exceptional. And just being completely oblivious to the backstory behind it, with the whole "give me a call" celebration in front of Marco Rudan, and the game being played midweek, you're 7-0 in front of an empty Amy Park. It's just such a extraordinary window into the Australian game. I find it hilarious that that's what the world's going to see.
I'll be honest with you, though, I don't really want it to win purely for the fact that Riley McGree got snubbed. And that's that bird if you want to see one. Do you know what I mean? So,
yeah.
Yeah, look, it's funny, but I honestly, I think with some of this stuff, I can tell you as a matter of fact, FIFA have an invested interest in having a universality quota with a lot of what they do. And so naturally, Australia, New Zealand, the likes of the Solomon Islands have been on a list like this before. Malaysia almost won the Puskas a few years ago. They've just got to do it, all right? So it's not actually that exciting. But it is also, I mean, yeah, it is a PK League moment, and in that sense, very funny to see, on the biggest stage.
This might be controversial, I'm not sure, but I don't actually think it's that level of a goal. Like
You said this when it happened.
if you had the flick on, okay, maybe, but like you see long range goals from halfway with the keeper off their line every so often, right? I don't know if it's a Puskás level goal, but anyway, it's fun for Antonis to be there. He's off in Thailand at the moment, right, Matt?
Yeah, he's gone travelling. I don't know if he was going to plan to be in Europe again sometime soon, but I know he was travelling. So.
Good on him. All right, let's move on. I don't really have much more to say, especially on the game of football that was played. So we'll move on. We have a little bit more money chat. Football Australia this time. They've entered, thankfully, a few black lines in the ledger over the past week or so. $6.3 million in funding from the Australian Sports Commission. That's over an 18th month period, which represents a 25% increase in high performance funding from the last cycle. Now, this is kind of specifically an Olympic angle, Jacob. The funds have been distributed across a wide range of Olympic sports. It's kind of hard to tackle this in a different way to what we usually do. It still feels low compared to what we think football is deserved. But that's the game. You have to play the game, and at the very least, it's a decent increase from what we got last time out.
Yeah, like in comparison to other, team sports and things, and we see we're always talking about participation numbers of football through the roof. It's top in the charts in I think every state, right? At a grassroots level, people love football. It's this Olympic angle that's the killer, but that's where it's actually quite interesting to me. Obviously, through my work with athletics, I've seen sort of what's going on there as well, and the best athletics performance at an Olympics for an Australian team, full stop, as in the number of medals that they won exceeds any other performance at an Olympics for an athletics team.
In Paris?
Yet, and yet athletics only received $2 million compared to a football program which didn't win anything. So, in that contrast, it looks like perhaps maybe the football is viewed a little bit favorably over some other sports, even those that are doing a really good job. So no, I mean, it is still low in comparison to, as we said, those participation numbers, especially against other team sports. But then when you do mention the fact that it is viewed through that Olympic lens, perhaps, maybe a bit fortunate to even get this much, considering the fact that higher performing sports, in terms of Olympic success, didn't get as much. So, I mean, it does suck. We'd all love more money, but we've got to deal with what we can, and at least we're getting something.
We'd all love more money. I think you just got a title for me. It's a good one. Matt, we'll finish off here, but we can't have you on the show without asking something specifically about Asian and Oceanic football as well. The draw for the Club World Cup is coming up on Friday. That's European time. Honestly, I have no idea when it's coming up for us. But a traditional 32-team tournament in terms of Asian participants, Al Hilal, Uro Red Diamonds, Al Ain and Ulsan, and then the wild card of Auckland City for Oceania as well. Is this something that, as a person who is so interested in this part of football, is this a tournament that you're really looking forward to? Because when a lot of people talk about it, especially in a European context, it's kind of talked about as a hassle and something that these clubs are going to have to go through. But from this part of the world, it's quite an exciting opportunity.
I really don't know enough about either of you in terms of your football influence, your views on the global game. I am someone who's pretty radical in the sense that I think that modern day UEFA is trying to outright compete with FIFA, and it needs to be held accountable for that. I'm not saying that the expansion of the Champions League, the Europa League, isn't a good thing, because naturally it has actually had a trickle-down effect to the point where the Asian Champions League has reformed. The CAF Champions League has become a really, really special thing for a lot of clubs in particularly Northern Africa. The Copa Libertadores final was the other night. Botafogo, incredible scenes. One of the players who scored, I think the second or third goal, he just burst out crying. He just couldn't hold it in. Seeing that passion on the global stage in football is important to actually understand that it's far bigger than what we see in the Western, that European sphere of influence that takes a big part of the game. So I think in growing an understanding of what football actually is, unless you're someone who really cares, you won't have the lens to understand why a tournament like this is so important. But what's really shitting me about this is, I was watching the launch event that was held in the US. They had fucking Hugh Jackman and all these actors on stage with Gianni Infantino at a watch party at Central Park, and they're going, and Philadelphia's going to host a game, and San Francisco's going to host a game. It's like, football people don't like, this is not what it's about, you know? So in that sense, it's kind of cringy, obviously. But in the sense that we're going to get to see, you know, obviously a club like Auckland City, but even someone like the Uri Red Diamonds, who have been a very, very quality club for plenty of years, the opportunity to go up against, you know, the likes of Real Madrid or Bayern Munich, I mean, it's huge. And in that sense, I want heads to turn, and I want an incredibly entertaining tournament. But, you know, ultimately, I just think that there's the side of it where it very clearly is a money grab, and the players are unionizing more and saying that they have to be playing less games. And ultimately, something like the UEFA Champions League is going to be held in a higher regard when something like a Club World Cup, although people won't like it, you know, they've not watched a team like Tunis in Northern Africa. They've not watched the Mamelodi Sundowns in South Africa. Just because these clubs are from where they are in the world doesn't mean they should be held with such disregard and disrespect. And that's where, again, I think if the UEFA Champions League still existed in like a 16-team format in support of something like a Club World Cup at the end of the season, that would be the ideal route for me. But I understand why it can't be that way, because people want to see, you know, Chelsea versus Real Madrid far more than they want to see Real Madrid play a sturdy North African side, for example. You know, so in that sense, I get it, but I'm still overwhelmingly excited at the prospect of something like this, and I think it has been in the works for a very, very long time. So,
Now, I might limit you to just maybe 2 minutes on this next one, because I'm sure you could go on forever about it. But something that I've personally really want to see come out of this as well is the conversation restart about how some teams get to this Club World Cup, and especially teams like Wellington and Auckland, who quite literally do not have a path to go there.
Look, I would like some logic to, you know, come over the whole OFC conundrum as well. But I think that as far as the global football audience are concerned, no one is really knowledgeable on the topic at all. I mean, I watch a lot of, like, you know, foreign football influence programs, people who are like FM nerds who become really big, you know, fans of like San Marino and their exploits in the Nations League and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And these people will talk about like global football, like the Copa Libertadores. If you're in certain, you know, nerdy soccer circles, you would have been paying attention to that game. You know what I mean? And so I think when most people talk about Australia, New Zealand, and Auckland, they don't know the bar of it. And I actually, you know, there's a pretty famous influencer. You may or may not have heard of Zealand, the FM YouTuber. So he was doing a video recently where he said he thought Wellington Phoenix were the team that was going to represent the OFC, and everyone's like, no, it's just some random semi-professional club. So we're talking about people who like actively go out of their way to make this their hobby and their careers, and they don't even know the bar of it, right? So, yeah, I'd like some logic to be able to say that if, as far as the AFC Champions League are concerned, the top two clubs in the A-League currently can't compete in it, which also there's a whole other conversation here, and I'll try not to go off on a tangent, but being a capped league, we actually have a problem where the teams that we send to the Champions League end up being weak.
Of course,
because they end up getting pegged down by the loss of talent and everything else, and the fact that they don't have a budget where they can spend more and be better prepared for it. And what's going to happen is we're not only going to send a team that's going to be a worse version of themselves going into the Champions League, we could potentially be sending a team that didn't even make the grand final, finished about third or fourth, to the Champions League, and that's deeply concerning to me. Like, there has to be some sort of intervention in terms of the AFC, the OFC coming towards some sort of agreement. And, you know, what kind of warms my heart is that the last time we had this conversation, it was about kicking the Phoenix out. So, like, we've progressed quite a lot. But yeah, I mean, this tournament across the board has a lot of problems. In North America in particular, two of the Mexican clubs that were selected on coefficient have the same owner. And like, that's a big no-no in UEFA with Red Bull and stuff like that. So let alone this Mexican guy getting away with having two teams. Inter Miami and Columbus Crew rightfully, you know, won the equivalent of the Premier's play. And then they were like, no, we want Messi in the tournament. We're selecting Miami anyway. And everyone in America was like, yeah, like, if you think Auckland and the OFC and AFC are going to care when that's corrupted going on in a far bigger, more influential city with Miami and a player like Messi at the heart of it, we don't stand a chance to reform our game. And that's it's kind of sad.
All right. Interesting. Yeah, fascinating conversation. That'll do for this episode of the Australian. No, I'm losing it. You can tell I'm not on it tonight. The Round Ball Australia podcast. It's been a long weekend. I'm not feeling too great, but we got through. I'm very thankful for Jacob Stevens for joining me today.
Thank you. And I want to correct myself about this Olympics thing as well. Got my numbers slightly wrong. Best Olympics campaign full stop ever for Australia, including all sports. Best athletics, so track and field, since 1956. So, still basically one of the best of all time for Australia. So just before somebody in the comments, oh, you got that wrong. Actually, I got to it ahead of you, so yeah, that's right. Thought I'd fact check myself after the count, not before it, but still got it right eventually.
Good on you. All right, Matt Olsen, thank you as well. Hopefully, potentially seeing a little bit more of you in the new year.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, everyone, very much for listening. We'll be back on Friday. Some more AFC content, of course, with Sydney FC and the Central Coast Mariners in action in midweek. We'll see you then. Goodbye.